Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu salam ala Rasulullah. We continue reading from Imam Al-Ghazali's On Disciplining the Soul, Kitab Riyadat al-Nafs, translated by Teacher Winter Abdul Hakim Murad. And we are still reading the translator's introduction, a very interesting introduction indeed. We are continuing the very last thing is the impact of Plato and others from the Greek philosophers on Muslim scholars. And the very last thing that we have read was about Al-Kindi, who was acquainted with Greek ethics, and one of his works on ethics and spiritual physics, or spiritual physics, both are lost. And we continue reading. Also influenced by Plato was Al-Razi. And when you hear Al-Razi, you need to remember that there could be also more than one Al-Razi. For us here now, we have two major scholars with the same name, unless you mention the first name or the honorific title or the books or the, because Al-Razi is from Al-Rai, which is the talk here is about Al-Razi, and the translator put basically between brackets he died in the year 313. That's 925 of the Common Era. Fakhruddin Razi, the scholar who wrote his tafsir is Mafatih al-Ghaib, died in 1210. He was Ash'arite and he was Shafi'i. Both were physicians. But it's a different status really in the in Islamic thought. The Abu Bakr Razi, who's mentioned here, his works on medicine continued to be the reference and for teaching the physicians and for medicine in Europe for some 400 years really. Along, one might add Ibn Sina to the picture, and in general the Islamic sciences. So they continued his Al-Hawi في الطب, about 30 volumes, and he wrote about the nervous system, etc. But at the same time he wrote about logic. Yep. Yes. So also influenced by Plato was Al-Razi. This is Abu Bakr Razi, known in the West as Rhazes, the author of commentary on the Timaeus, and indebted also to Galen. He wrote a work entitled Spiritual Physics, At-Tibb al-Ruhani, which has been translated into English by A.G. Arbery. More than any other philosopher in the Islamic world, he seems to have been indifferent to religion. More than any other philosopher in the Islamic world, he seems to have been indifferent to religion. although his austere and largely Platonic understanding of ethics assumes the existence of God, if not the immortality of the soul. There is little evidence that his work exerted an influence over later Muslim writers. The controversial issue here is you'll find not during his time, but during later, probably the modern scholars might render Abu Bakr Razi as a mulhid, as a non-believer. This was not the case. Imam al-Dhahabi has, quote unquote, a normal, respectful entry about Abu Bakr al-Razi. He practically praised him. Now, he was indifferent to religion. One of the titles of his works that I have read, في أن الإنسان خالق أو خالقا really خالقا للإنسان, that the human being has a creator, which is really, if he speaks about the creator, then isn't that also a religious thing? The Neapolitanist tendency is again prominent in the epistles of the Brethren of Purity. These are إخوان الصفا وخلان الوفا. They wrote their رسائل are 52. So these Brethren of Purity, a group of Muslim thinkers whose eclecticism extended to the use of Pythagorean, Hermetic, Ismaili, and other ideas. The melange, the mixture, is extremely problematic. Okay. Although their 52 epistles range from treatments of mineralogy and botany to religious law, their evident Muslim commitment and their Neoplatonic interests encourage them to take a close interest in ethical method, which, like Plotinus, they believe was the key to self-purification and hence to the return to the One. The return to the One. They taught that although all men are born with a natural receptivity to goodness, character traits, akhlaq, are affected by 4 factors: the balance of humors, al-akhlaq, against subscribing to Greek heritage, and he was he was the so the akhlaq in the body, climate, upbringing, and the influence of the stars. The interplay of these factors generates and affects the 4 principal Platonic virtues, and hence the subsidiary virtues and vices. I remember needing to read إخوان الصفا when I was in Boston, and I found a copy of the of this work of the Brethren of Purity, Ikhwan Mustafa, in the public library in Roslindale, on the outskirts of Boston. I like the idea that I could find such a book in a local library close to home, at least at the time. When man's character is perfect, he becomes God's vicegerent, Khalifa. He becomes God's vicegerent on earth, and his spiritual faculty transformed through a complex Neoplatonic hierarchy of souls will penetrate to God. Porphyry's emphasis on aesthetism and an attitude of disdain for the world is here expressed in the Islamic language of Zuhd, asceticism, which the Brethren assert is in fact the highest of all virtues. In the same work, a tendency becomes visible, which was to be even more marked in the work of Ghazali, namely the filtering out of Greek virtues, which seems to contradict Islamic ideas. For instance, the virtue known as greatness of soul, kibar nafs, while entirely acceptable in a Greek context, seemed to the Brethren to smack of vainglory. And they debated whether it should be considered a virtue at all. Finally, the Brethren diverged from the mainstream Arab philosophers in stressing the Muslim claim that in view of man's general incapacity to work out his own salvation, God in his mercy has sent prophets with laws and moral guidance to assist them. Another ethical theorist, the Christian philosopher Yahya bin Adi, a philosopher but also a theologian, a Christian theologian, of course, was similarly Platonic in orientation, as one would expect from his devotion to Al-Farabi, although Aristotelian ideas are not wholly absent from his ethical treatise. The refinement of character, تهذيب الأخلاق. He follows Plato's threefold division of the soul, which had already been recognized by the Brethren, and then proceeds to enumerate 20 virtues and 20 vices, most of which are familiar from Plato and Aristotle, and may have been communicated to him through the work of some late intermediary, which has since vanished. This is followed by a section in which he lists traits which can be virtues in some men and vices in others. A category which does not appear in Ghazali and other Orthodox Muslim thinkers. Far more influential was Abu Ali ibn Sina, Avicenna, known in the West as Avicenna, who is often and not unjustly regarded as the greatest of the Muslim philosophers. Although he did not write very extensively on ethics, his developed theory of the soul, which he drew from the Greek, and particularly the Aristotelian tradition, provided the basis or the basic source of philosophic psychology for both Miskawayh and Al-Ghazali. And Miskawayh is like he himself, like the cornerstone of developed Islamic ethics, if you will. But he also, I think, it's fair to say that he was also influenced by the Greeks. Of the three faculties of the soul, which for him are the vegetative, animal, and rational, Ibn Sina devotes particular attention to the latter two, and shows how the concupiscent and irascible aspects of the animal soul are the root of the virtues and vices, being governed or neglected by the active faculty of the intellect, which in turn should be in harmony with the intellect's theoretical faculty or spirit, which is in contact with the world of intelligibles. Partly for this reason, there is a strong religious dimension to Ibn Sina's thought, which manifests itself in a serious consideration of spiritual discipline, Riyala, whose categories he is clearly borrowing from Sufism, rather as the Brethren of Purity had done. This was later to appeal to Ghazali, who, although concerned to avoid the use of philosophical language, developed a psychology which was largely in conformity with this Abyssinian system. Also dependent on Aristotle was the Baghdad philosopher and historian Abu Ali Miskawi. He died in 1030, just just before the birth of Al-Ghazali in 1058, who, like Ibn Adi, wrote a work called The Refinement of Character. This work, which was destined to become the most influential text of its kind in Arabic, was popular not so much of any great originality as for the author's talent for synthesizing Platonic, Aristotelian, and Islamic ideas on the moral life, which he cast in a pleasing Arabic style and adorned with quotations from sources as varied as Homer, Aristotle, Galen, Pythagoras, Al-Kindi, Al-Hasan al-Basri, and the Quran. Drawing on Ibn Adi, Al-Kindi, and Galen, Miskawi again explained the three faculties of the soul and the four cardinal virtues, and develops the attempts of earlier philosophers to relate these to numerous subordinate virtues. His Muslim background disposes him against Aristotelian teaching that the end of virtue is the attainment of happiness in this world, which is basically in Greek theater, in Greek commedia and tragedia. This is apparent that it's really about here and now, and this is where the work of Sayyid Muhammad Naqib al-Attas on happiness addresses this issue. Ultimately it's the hereafter, and he is confident the Neoplatonic interpretation of the acquisition of virtue as having essentially spiritual ends is correct. This suggests, as do certain indications in his work itself, that he was reading the Nicomachean Ethics, which I have read in the summer of in 1984, with the lost commentary of Periphery together, perhaps with the perfect state of Al-Farabi, المدينة الفاضلة. In a section which treats the upbringing of children, he acknowledged the influence of the Neo-Pythagorean philosopher Bryson, perhaps his most important contribution, however, was his reliance on Aristotle's doctrine of the mean, أن الفضيلة وسط بين طرفين مذمومين. So the mean falls typically between two states of excess, deficiency, and exaggeration. So, with his reliance on Aristotle's decline of the mean, which, as he showed, could be comfortable squared with the Platonic system, although, as we have seen, his marriage had been attempted before. This marriage had been attempted before. It was Miskawayh who expounded the fullest Muslim synthesis of the two ethical systems. It was partly for this reason that his work served as a model not only for Ghazali, but for the major works of Muslim philosophically oriented ethics from his time on. Hence, really, Miskawayh is the most influential Muslim ethicist who systematically wrote from within this field. Also teaching at Baghdad was the Shafi'i jurist and judge Al-Mawardi, who died in 1058, the year Imam Ghazali was born. In his book, Conduct in the World and Religion, he shows himself prepared to quote extensively from Greek wisdom in order to buttress Islamic morality, although his approach is largely anecdotal and lacks Miskawayh's more systematic approach in common with several other works of the period. The book is a popular analogy of episodes drawn from both Greek and Islamic sources, and as such it has retained its popularity in the Arab world into the present century. It does, however, also include a program of self-reform, tahdid, of a firmly Islamic character, and its use of such terms as riyada and muhasaba displays an awareness of the Sufi tradition. A debt to Aristotle too is visible in Mawardi's frequent references to the principle of the mean, which he expresses in terms of moderation, tawassut, a word which would shortly be employed by Al-Ghazali himself, rahimahullah, ulama al-Muslim ajma'in. This is enough, inshallah, for this session, and we'll continue in the next one. We are not very far from the end of the introduction. I hope that within the next couple of sessions or so, we'll be able to finish reading the introduction. Until then, subhanakallah, alhamdulillah, la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.